Today's topic, configuring file services in the Windows Server 2008. There have been some improvements. One of the things we're going to review is how permissions work. One of the things that I have asked you to do, unless I put the wrong lab in the lab is to set up a scenario where you give explicit permissions to allow different groups to do things. That's the only way I know to actually make these things work. Permissions are an area that people love to ignore because it's relatively simple, honestly, if you just sit down and do it. But I think that once you give them, try them out to be sure they're doing what you think they're going to do. I see an awful lot of people do server configurations. Click, 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 it's done, and then they walk away, and then all of a sudden it's not doing what they think that it should be doing. So try them out once you do the configurations to be sure they're doing what you want them to do. To me, the really neat role service that's available in this one is this DFS, Distributed File System, which has become an awful lot better in Server 2008 than it was in any of the previous versions. It allows you to set up a system so that you actually have replication inside of Windows. You don't have to go buy third-party software. Some of it is a little bit around the world, I think, process, but it is available. What it also allows you to do is to create shares based on an Active Directory stored location, so that if you have multiple servers and you have different sites, let's say we have Roanoke and maybe we need the files available in Roanoke and let's pick Raleigh, 2 R's there, then you can replicate between the servers, and the people at Raleigh will get the information from the local server and the people at Roanoke will get it from the Roanoke local server. Bases it on sites, and we talked about sites in Active Directory. Sites is an IP address, IP subnet definition. So it allows you a lot of flexibility in file storage, and that's a relatively big deal. It's a really big deal if you allow your competitor to have all of your business information, and then they'll probably take your resume too, and then you won't have a resume to update because you set up your file system permissions wrong. Permissions is something that can get you into trouble, something that you really need to understand. It's something that mostly people just want to try to ignore. The two permissions, the share and the NTFS, depending upon where we do those things. So the objectives discuss file services in the Windows Server 2008, and there are some other, the FSRM, File Services Management, I think is what it's called, allows you to do things like, oh golly, we don't want Trevor to be able to put music files on our server, so we can filter what can actually go there. It also has some report capability, and these are some things that were available in the past in the Windows storage server but have now migrated into Windows Server 2008, 2003 in the storage server. You had those capabilities to do a report. One of the reports allows you to go find duplicate files. The storage server has this capability called single instance storage, so that it goes through and checks the entire structure, and if it finds duplicate files, it actually only has one of them stored physically. The others point to the one file. So some of those capabilities. Install the distributed file system in the Windows Server 2008. That's just a matter of putting the role on. You also have some role services that you can put in there other than DFS. FSRM is one of the services that you probably just go ahead and put it in when you put DFS in, because they're going to ask you to do some of those things. Discuss and create shared file resources in Windows Server 2008. And what the distributed file system does is allows you to access the shares from a central location. Distributed shares, they can be on different servers. If it's a single server, they can be in different locations on the server. That's probably not all that mystical, magical. I think that being able to share these things, create the share, where it appears that they're at a single root, and I ask you to do one of these too. Create a share on your core machine and a share on your full machine, and then make them all appear as if they're in one location. You'll do that through the distributed file system, through the domain distributed file system. Functions of the Server 2008 Services role: File Server, DFS, File Server Resource Manager, that's the FSRM, Services for Network File System, and the 2003 File Services backward compatibility. And again, to me, I think the neat things are the DFS and the File Server Resource Manager. The FSRM, because you can actually filter. You can find who's using all of your disk space by allowing this thing to do a report. If you want to do a quick who's using all the disk space or where's all the storage, there is a utility in the sysinternals package, which I'm sure everybody's gone and gotten, because it's got so many really cool tools in it, called DU, disk utilization. I know that's also in Linux. That allows you to, by directory, see where all the disk space is. It'll give you a summary of what's going on. Because when you look at the Explorer, it'll tell you what the file size is, but it won't tell you what the folder size is unless you right-click or hover or do something like that, right? DU will give you a summary of what's going on, and it's a pretty simple utility to use. File server role, by activating the file services if necessary, and that's installing the role, and it'll activate those. The role services and other features can be installed through the GUI. Install the file server role. You've done roles before. It's just a matter of going to the roles and picking the file server and then which services you want under it. DFS, you're definitely going to want, and I think probably the FSRM, because I believe there is a lab to do with that. Sharing and NTFS permissions. We've done this once, so let me know. Tell me what you remember about it. What does a share do? What does it do for you? Why do we care about sharing stuff? Makes it easier to share files. Movies and videos and whatever you want to share. You can do it that way. So we right-click on a folder, and you can only share folders. You cannot share individual files. If you right-click on a file, you can give NTFS permissions, but you can't share an individual file. You can only share a folder. What it does is makes it available across the network. If we share something, Trevor wants to share his movies, but he sits down on the computer where the movies are, the share has absolutely no impact on anything. Because what the share says is I can contact it remotely. That's why we do sharing. They've changed the look in 2008 a little bit. You can still go back to the old-fashioned way, advanced sharing, where it looks exactly like it does in 2003 and 2000, and basically NT4. NT4 didn't have the deny side; it just had a deny down at the bottom, where we can do that. So in 2000 and on up, we can deny individual components of that. So sharing a network access point for clients to access data across the network. You can share the movies and all that other good stuff, but what if you wanted to, as a network administrator, you had these 10,000 computers, and instead of taking your CD and sending down to these 10,000 computers over the weekend, which you're never going to get through, you want to create a software installation point, which we did in the server, where we install the software via policy. What do you have to create so that all those computers can find that resource? A share. And when you create it, and some people did and some people didn't, but be careful that you actually go to the share, because if you go to the C:// wherever it's stored, it's not going to install unless you copy all those files to all those computers, which would kind of defeat the purpose of what we're going to do here. So sharing allows us to see something across the network. Sharing allows you to see your home directory. If we didn't have a share, would you be able to see your home directory? And I think the answer to that is no. Because how would you get there if it wasn't shared? There are some, and I'm going to wander around and then we'll go through the slides to see what I missed. There are some what are called administrative shares, and when you look at this, look at the shares when you do look in computer management. It'll show you shared folders. You're going to have for each of the disks, each of the volumes, C, D, E, whatever you have, a C $sign. And you're going to have an IPC $sign and an admin $sign. $sign after the share means it's a hidden share, which for your installation, for your software installation point, probably would be a relatively good idea so that Stephen doesn't bring his laptop in and plug in and say, oh, I just want to install Office. I want a free copy of Office. Won't work for us because our Office is KMS. And unless you are able to contact the KMS server at Virginia Beach, it wouldn't do any good. But you probably want to make those hidden shares so that they're not obvious. Is it something that absolutely can't be discovered? No. It's still there. It's a share, but when you contact those, when you go to those shares, you have to put the $sign because it becomes part of the name. We have some hidden shares, $sign shares, that Windows creates for administrative purposes. If you're someplace, for instance, and you haven't created a share on your server and you need to get to something, you can get to, as long as you have administrative authority, you can get to the root share, the C $, / computer name or IP address / C $, and it will connect you to the root of C, and you can get all of the information from the C drive. That's an administrative share. You really don't want to allow other people to use that. You need an administrative password to do that. And again, there are some other ones that are created for administrative purposes. The system folder is there. So a share allows us to see information across the network, and that's the only thing it does for us. The default permission for a share is read, the read permission. We're going to have full control, change, does that sound right, and read only? Or read and execute, actually, not read only, read and execute. You can give explicit permissions, and we can also deny. One, again, caution, the explicit denies are very, very dangerous. Because what happens is you give an explicit deny, and then a year and a half later, somebody can't get to something for some reason because of that explicit deny, which, of course, you dutifully logged in your server log. Yeah, I wouldn't have. And it's like, why can't they get here? I put them in the right groups, but they can't get there because they have an implicit deny. I'll go back to your home directories and deny. When you go to your HMAP, or if you go to start run / RKE-storage1, you should be able to see, if you go to RKE-storage1, you should be able to see a share called student home. And when you go in there, you'll probably see the whole listing. And we should be able to turn that listing off so that you can't see those. It doesn't give you the list of, that's one of the other options in there. So it doesn't give you the list of folders that you can't get into. But if Jody double clicks on Jason's home directory, we would hope it would say no. And why would that be? The implicit deny that we talked about. Because we gave Jason permission to Jason's home directory and we didn't give it to Jody. So instead of going through and for all of the students or in your organization, your 10,000 users for their home directories, instead of going through and having to put 9,999 users in everybody's home directory as a deny, except the one user that gets it, we use the implicit deny. Implicit deny, we give it to the person that's supposed to have it or the group that's supposed to have it, and don't give it to the other users, then the other users can't get there, just simply because they haven't been given that permission. And that goes back to the implicit or explicit deny. Instead of using explicit denies, depend upon implicit denies. Because in that case, the user that got promoted, that we had given the explicit deny to this folder, and they would have been denied anyway because they weren't in the group, all we have to do to give them access to that resource is put them in a group. They're probably going to have to log on. And I say probably because the literature all says you have to log on. Yeah, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, and I haven't ever figured out exactly when you do and when you don't. If you give somebody access to a resource and they can't get to it, have them log off and log back on, because you get your token, your ticket, your group memberships, and that's how you actually get to resources when you log on to the network. And the token says what you can get to and what you can do once you get to that resource. So having now talked about all that stuff, what does the share do for you? Share files across the network allows us to see the resource as long as we have permissions to it. The default share is read to everyone. Probably not the best permission in the world. The old permission was full control to everyone, and all these MCSEs got upset. Me too. I didn't have any influence, but some of them obviously did, so they changed it to read only. The only thing that did to me was really confuse me. Not really confuse me, but I have to change my mechanics, because let's say you're the network administrator and you want to be able to put things on that share, copy information to that share. In my case, for the things that we use here, I have a labs folder that you get to through Moodle. That labs folder is stored on a local server. If I share, and I go through the administrative share, if I create a share to that for me, and using the default right-click, share, it's going to be a read-only, and then I go in and give myself full control NTFS permissions, and we'll talk about how these things react here in a minute. But, well, we'll talk about that right now. Since I shared it with the default, it told me that I can read. And then I gave myself full control NTFS. Doesn't care. When you share something, you go across the network, you get the most restrictive, the lowest level of permissions. So by doing that, I can read it, but I can't put anything in there because my most restrictive permission is read, even though I have full control for the NTFS. So when we contact something across the network, we put these two permissions together, the one we haven't talked about yet, NTFS, but we have talked about in the other class, and the share permission. But the share allows us simply to see that resource, to allow others to get to that resource. The permission that you honestly might want to use instead of the everyone is take the everyone group out and put authenticated users in. Authenticated users say they've got to be authenticated to your network. Everyone is anybody that can see it. That doesn't mean that you can just start / and be able to get into the resource. It's still going to ask you to log on. But everyone is everyone that can get there. Everyone that can use, can provide a username and password to do those things. Client use, SMB is the protocol, server, message, block, and this is the difference between the / and the // The / is going to be looking for a resource, a share resource basically. / UNC, Universal Naming Convention, computer name, / share. If you don't put a / share, / computer name, will give you a list of shares. It's not like you really got to know the share, unless it's a hidden share. If you do / and it's a hidden share, you're not going to see it until you put the share name in along with the computer name. But the protocol it uses is SMB, server message block. All you Linux guys, what does that mean to you, SMB? What server are we talking about here for Linux? Samba server. So it has the ability, this then gives us the ability once you install Samba on the Linux, and is it install on the new ones by default now? It didn't used to. You still have to put it on separately, right? But that gives us the compatibility with Windows. The other way to get compatibility with Linux is to install NFS on the Windows machine. Because then
one version is you had to install it, but like if you install like a regular distro like Mint or Ubuntu, it should be.
Yeah. It may or may not be. Ubuntu is designed, what is that? They call it Linux for people, or something like that. It actually installs some stuff that make things a little more convenient for you so that you don't have to do all of that stuff. So SMB is the protocol for shared resources. Public and standard sharing, in the configurations, the computer configurations is a public sharing. It's a public folder that anybody can get to. This is an addition in Server 2008. You don't have to turn it on. You can turn it on. It's one of those things that you can configure. The standard sharing is a folder that we right-click on, Share. Advanced sharing gives you, again, what I call the old-fashioned way, which gives you the listing to everyone and then what the permissions are. If you just do sharing, it's going to, who is shared to, read whatever you want to do with the users that you add to the share. The public folders, %system drive, users, %system drive is going to be like C:\users public directory. So that is available if you want to share that out as a public resource. I think the more common method of sharing resources is still right-click, share, and then you control who you want to be able to get to those resources. Standard file sharing makes the following folders accessible to network locations. The sharing, again, allows us to see it across the network, and restricts access. I won't say that's all it does. It also does some access, restricts some access. And again, this says makes files and folders accessible from the network. You cannot right-click and share a file. You have to share a folder. If you have one file that you want to share, you still got to put it in a folder. So shares have to be folders. And then we have NTFS. You can share stuff on FAT32 volumes. And if you have FAT volumes from way back when, you can share them on FAT volumes too. You don't have as much control over permissions on a FAT volume. Windows 95 had the ability to share. And Windows 95 had the ability to put a password on it. But the password was the same for everybody. It wasn't like I could restrict it to Jason and Jody and the rest of you couldn't get in. Anybody had the password to get in. It was a single password for that share. Now we restrict based on username, and that's going to go back to we'll put some other terms in here, back to the SID of the user, the security ID. So we do the share to allow it to be seen across the network, and honest to goodness, after all of that, oh my gosh, this everyone full control is really, really dangerous. It's not. So what do I do most of my shares? Either full control or everyone or full control to authenticated users. Why would I do that? Where we really control resources is the NTFS permissions. Because each of these individually you get the most permissive resource, the most permissive permission. What you get is additive. If you're a member of more than one group has read, one group has change, one group has full control. You add all those up, you get full control. What it winds up is you get whatever the highest level permission you have, unless you have a deny. And hopefully you remember that if we put a deny in there, deny wipes out everything else. So if I deny full control, if I have 600 full controls, and I put one deny full control, the one deny wipes out all of the 600 full controls. In TFS, the preferred format, and you shouldn't be particularly server 2008, 2003, any of these servers be running on anything but an NTFS partition, unless you have, for some odd reason, need backward compatibility, some other operating system. When I say backward compatibility, that means a dual boot. Because if we go across the network doesn't care if it's FAT or GPT or FAT permission, FAT file share, as long as it's shared. The file formats, FAT and all that stuff, is if we dual boot it, that we would have to be able to read that file system with the operating system that is booted to. When you get into, and we'll go way back to NT4, NT4 doesn't understand this as FAT32. NT4 doesn't understand the FAT32 system. It only understands the FAT system. So if we did a dual boot with a server 2008 and we had a data folder and a FAT file system NT4, we would have to put the data in a FAT file system so that both of them could read it. So that would be the common. If we do sharing And then NTFS permissions across the network, they don't care because it's going across the network. Doesn't really care what the file system is. So NTFS is the preferred format for the Server 2008, the Server 2003, the Server 2000, the NTFS, the NT4 file system. Can only use share permissions on the FAT32s, and the share permissions here, the logon permissions, you have like a logon. Share level permissions defined at the resource level allow clients to access to a network share. Apply only when a file or folder is being accessed from the network, remote access. Well, since Trevor would answer my question, we'll go back to him. He's going to share let's say he's going to share a movie. He would put the movie or video, or a video that he made, so that we don't get into anybody, oh golly, he's out there pirating software. But, but a video that he has created that he wants to share on his network, a training video, will make it even useful. He would put it in a folder, right-click, share, and if he didn't want you guys to mess with it, what would he make the permission? Read only. And if he wanted to be able to modify it, he would go in there and share it to himself, his user, and give himself full control to it.
Does the creator automatically get full control over the share?
Not in the share. Share gets a little weird. If you look at those, the share permission, the default, the NTFS, you're absolutely right, but the share permission is read to everyone. Take a look at a read permission here and see if I lied to you. How's that? I'm not going to do it on my desktop here because I messed that up the last time. Okay, we're on a server here. Let's see if when we share something, what happens to it. And we can just go in here and make a new folder called something really clever like demo. Right-click, properties, and then when we get to this thing in the sharing, share advanced sharing, when we go into the advanced sharing, share this folder, permissions, the default permission is read to everyone. If I did when I do the NTFS, and we can look at that real quickly also. So go to the security in the NTFS, creator owner here, it says advanced. When we go into the advanced, I think it's going to tell us that we're going to have full control. Creator owner special, not inherited. You got to go into the look at it and see administrators get full control, not inherited, all of those other things. So yeah, the share is in fact read to everyone. Do you really want that to be the case? Well, it's a good starting point. Because we had everyone reading, and what if we put a group in that want to be able to change it, or Trevor put himself in and wants to be able to change it. When he takes his read and his full control permission and adds them together, then he has a share of full control for his user. We can also, as you saw, change the NTFS permissions. The NTFS permissions will be the only permission as long as he's sitting at the computer, at the console. If we access something across the network remotely through the share, when we put the share permission, the read only for everyone, and let's say that we gave everyone full control NTFS permission. What would your permissions be when you accessed it across the network? Give me a guess. It's a 50-50 night. It's either got to be full control or read only. Which is it going to be? Trevor, which is it?
Full control.
Full control when we access across the network.
Repeat the question.
We give ourselves, we get the share, read only, right? We saw that. And we share this thing, and then the guy, we don't fool around with this NTFS business. We just go in and give NTFS permissions to everyone. Full control. NTFS permission. and then we access it across the network. What permission do you get? Full control or read-only?
Full control.
Full control. I got 2 full controls.
I would say share permission, so read-only.
Read-only. I got two fulls and a read-only. Got to say one or the other. 50-59 here, right?
I'm going with share permission.
Going with the share permission. So I got 2 of each. 2 full controls and 2 read-onlys. Full control. Full control. 50-50-90 rule bore itself out. 50-50-90 rule says given a 50-50 chance, you'll screw it up 90% of the time, right? What happens when you put the share and the NTFS permission together across the network? Which one do you get? You get the most restrictive, whichever is the most restrictive. And in this case, the share is the most restrictive. So even though we have full control NTFS, we have read-only share. When we put them together, we have read-only. You normally do that the other way around. Because now, if somebody sits down and logs on to Trevor's computer and we gave everyone full control, and anybody can delete his video.
So you had full control with the
Share. And read-only on NTFS, that's the safe way. Then they could read-only.
Okay.
Okay? Does that make sense?
So the best thing to do with the share is just mix it.
Yeah, it has to do with when we put them together across the network, then we get the most restrictive. If you sit down at the computer, and in the NT4 test, shows you how long I've been trying to do this stuff. They have one that they give you, and Microsoft always gives you about a paragraph and a half of stuff that you don't need. Gave you a whole bunch of shares. You did this share to this, share to that, share to who, share whatever, and then you're logged on at the console. And you have one NTFS permission. What permission do you have? You have whatever your NTFS permission is. And when you do these individually, if we had a couple of groups and we gave you a read-only in one group and a full control in another group, you get the most permissive individually. But when you put them together and you access it across the network, you get the most restrictive, the lowest level. So regardless of what we did, and in this one, if we have one group we give read in the NTFS and one group we give modify and another full control, if you're members of all of those groups, you're going to get the additive, or simply put, whatever the highest level is of those permissions individually. But again, when you go across the network, whatever the most restrictive permission is. If I had multiple shares, I would get shared permission, I would get the most permissive. If we have one group that we gave read-only and another group we gave full control, and you remember both groups, then you got full control share. And again, typically that's the way, after they changed all that, people go in and now you got to change it instead of just using this everyone full control. Because what is a share? Where is a share permission invoked? Where does it work? Only if you access something remotely. So the one that you really control access to typically is going to be your NTFS permission. A couple of little oddities. I know I told you about the great access cheating scandal, probably about 1998. The way they did that was the one student who knew how to do the test put in his home directory and shared his home directory. The reason he could do that was because he had full control to his home directory. If he'd only had modify, would allow him to put everything in, change the files, create directories and all that other stuff, but he wouldn't have been able to share the resource. That's something you may want to take away if you want people to be able to do whatever they can do in their home directories, but then not be able to share those resources, to share all the company's secrets. Then don't give them full control. Each of the permissions, as you go up the line, and they used to read and write and do them from the bottom, but they got right at the bottom now. But each of the permissions as they progress implies that you have the permission below it. So the only thing you're doing is adding to existing permissions, starting with the read-only. And the list files. The list files is one of those that if people don't have the authority, you may not want it. If they can't get there, don't give them that kind of deal. Is this making any sense? Access control do not apply to users logged into the machine locally. The access control. The share permissions. And that's because they only work when you access something remotely. So they are, the share permissions, read, change, full control, and these are in the book, and deny. Again, deny. Any deny wipes out everything. And all you military guys have been through those, and I'm not going to say it on a recording. But you know what wipes out everything, right? All those attaboys just go away if you make one mistake, right? The default administrative shares, we talked about those, admin $, IPC. IPC $, allows the machines to talk to each other, allows remote execution sort of things. And the net logon allows the logons, allows things to run there. And if you look in shared permissions, the admin $, IPC net logon, the new folder here, new folder, sysvol, each of these things are listed in the shares in the file system management. You can see what's shared. Don't forget about this, because after a while you make these shares, and you can see these shares when you go to look at it, and you wind up with a server's got 20 or 30 shares. Where's the physical folder? I want to put something in that share. Where is it? You got to remember the path to all those 20 or 30 folders? And you didn't give yourself full control. You were not able to write back to the share. Yes. No? Okay. But this will tell you the physical path, the local path to the share. Yes, I've had to use that several times. I want to put this in, but where the heck did I put it? And you got 4 or 5 drives maybe on the server, and then you got 20 or 30 share folders. Just look and see. Then you can drop it into the correct folder, and everybody can get it through the share. User level permissions in TFS, we've looked at that, the preferred file system, all those other good things, file permissions and folder permissions. They're a little bit different because one, you can't put something inside a file, obviously. And if you look at them, they're slightly different, the file permissions and the folder permissions. But generally, they're going to be very similar. The NTFS permissions are the ones that apply when you're logged on locally. Actually, the NTFS permissions apply when you go remotely through the share, as well as when you sit down and log on at the console, at the computer itself, or when you do a remote desktop. All of those things, the NTFS permissions are going to be effective. Like everything else, individually, if we sit down at the computer and if we have one that gives us read-only, one gives us modify, one gives us full control, when we add all those up, we're going to have full control. So individually, just like in the share you got the most permissive, in the NTFS you get the most permissive, whatever the highest level is. And you'll read they're additive. Yes, they're additive, but golly, the easiest thing for me to remember is whatever the highest level is, that's what I get. You don't really have to add them all up. Full control, modify, read and execute, read and write, each of these things. There are some tricks you can play if you want to share things and only let users get things. Before we had Moodle, I used to have my own Dropbox, poor man's Dropbox. The files that you got, you had read-only. You couldn't put them back in there. And that got dangerous for people that were in the server class. They decided they knew what they would do, and they went. I had a student one night, did a whole test and got done, had decided that it would save itself, opened it from the share, clicked X, and it's going to say, you didn't save this, you know that. Okay, keep going. Didn't save the test because it didn't have the permission to write back to the source. You need to be careful of those things. If I wanted students to be able to put something in a folder, we'll give them write but no read. You could see your own stuff because when you put it in, you got your write implies read. You got permissions to your own resources, but nobody else could see it. So you can do some things like that with NTFS. When would you do that? If you had an FTP server that you didn't want users to be able to see the files that somebody else had put up. Something like that might work. File permissions, these are folder permissions. List folder, read, write, execute, modify, displays, write to a file, append to a file, and read to change its attributes. Each of those things. Again, a little bit different, but they're very, very similar. Access control lists used by NTFS to define permissions to a resource. Access control list is just a list of the users that can get there. When we looked at those permissions on that folder, and it started out with administrators and all that stuff, that's an access control list. The access control entries are the users that are in that list. Administrators would be an ACE, an access control entry. The list is all the users that are on it, that are on the list. Authentication, the tokens, the object attached to the user's account that validates the user's identity and privileges. The token is going to be attached to your user account. Actually, what really happens is the token gets attached to all of the applications that you open. For instance, you want to open a Word document. The token gets attached to Microsoft Word, and then when you go to that file that you're trying to open, it compares the permissions that are in the file that have been inherited from the folder most probably with the permissions that are in the token. Can you open the file? Can you read the file? Once you read the file, can you make changes to the file? What permissions do you have? Those are in the token, and the Kerberos system authentication is what actually works on these tokens. If we use the NTLM, every time you opened a file, you'd have to be re-authenticated. Now you get the token, attach the token to the user account, the applications in the user account, and you can access the resources that are authorized in that token without re-authenticating. What that should tell you is if you change somebody's permissions while they're logged on, they need a new token. The only way you can get a token is to log on, so they may have to log off and log back on. I told you, sometimes it, honest goodness, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. The SIDs, the security identifier, make every user, computer, and resource on the network unique. You'll see these occasionally if, and I usually see them when I do a trust from one domain to the other, when it gets a little slow in actually giving you the image for whatever the user is, and it start out with an S, and it's a very long number. So the security identifier is a number. And that goes back to the, if somebody goes away, let's say that graduated, went away for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and wanted to come back to do a bachelor's program. Well, instead of disabling your account, we deleted your account. We'll pick on Jason since he did 1 degree and he came back for the CET right now, came back for the IT NetSec. If they had deleted his account and then recreated his account, he would have had a new SID. He wouldn't have had his old home directory. He wouldn't have had any of his old resources. If you think that the user may come back, or you may want to just simply rename that account, and I think we talked about that, campus president, CEO, chief financial officer, something like that. Somebody resigns from the company, but you're going to hire somebody behind them, and they have access to maybe 300 or 400 resources. Instead of deleting that account, and then when the new one comes in trying to figure out the 300 or 400 resources, just disable the account. When the new person comes in, rename the account. It'll have the same SID, access to the same resources. Give them a new home directory. So it saves you some work. The SID can be your friend or can be your enemy. Either way. File folder sharing is implemented through the Shared Folders Windows Explorer. The net share command, the share and storage management console. This is a new console in Server 2008, I believe. I don't recall it in 2003. It was something that started out in the storage server and has kind of migrated into the 2008. 2008 has a lot of things that they've tried out that they've moved over into it that makes it a more efficient server resource. Deploying, we've done that. Right-click, share, allows access. As we saw, the default permission is read to everyone. that's not what you want modified. If you as the administrator or you as an individual want to be able to write things back to that share, give yourself full control, because that's the only way it's going to work. File sharing are performed on using the file sharing wizard. You can do all that stuff. They have all sorts of clever tools to allow people that don't know what they're doing to give away stuff that they don't want to. To me, instead of using all this wizard stuff, right click, look at it, see what you're sharing, who you're sharing it to. The net share command can be used, should be used at the command line, and then they've got another one to give permission called a cackle, C-A-C-L-S, gives permissions. And that's how you get permissions to your home directory, through the script. You get permissions to your home directory. Administrator gets permissions to your home directory so they can check, see if you get a virus or something like that. Can run the virus checker through it. And other users don't get permissions through the script, so therefore they don't get access to your home directory. The new way, the file sharing wizard, we have a co-owner, contributor, reader, the owner, full control. The co-owner, full control. The contributor, modified, and the share permission is changed, which allows them to change the content of the document. And then the reader, read is the read only. If you don't like the way these are, don't want to worry about those, go to the event sharing like we looked at a little earlier in that one. The net share command, and then this is in the book. This is a good command to know, like all of the net commands, the net share, net use, those things. You may need to use those in scripts at some point in time. Offline files can be a real good thing or a real dangerous thing, depending on what you do. Allow shared resources to be available when clients are not connected to the network, which means that the example that they use typically is you're at an isolated site and you have a something document that you're working on. It's really important to the company. Well, Jody, we were going to send him to California, right, to get the contract to save something in Martinsville. And he got there and he didn't have his presentation. Because if he had put it on his laptop, if we had done offline files, it would have been automatically saved on his laptop. There also is a sync center in Windows 7 that allows you to do something very similar to that. But offline files, and we can control which files are cached offline and which files aren't. You have to turn offline files on, and they've got an activity to do that. Doesn't mean that just anything can be there. It's kind of handy. One of the examples of a course that I did, the guy was talking about, he did pictures. He had these enormously large files. He had one picture file that was 1.2 gigabyte. That's a big file. How much bandwidth is that going to take to modify across the network? What if you get it on the local machine and you make all your changes on the local machine, and then when you get done, it gets synchronized with the base document? That's what offline files do for you. The other thing it does for you, if you have offline files and the network goes down, the remote site poor connectivity goes down, then you can work on it locally. When connectivity comes back, it gets synchronized to the server. So those are also handy things. Distributed file systems is one of my favorites. I thought it was just the greatest thing in the world when they came out with it in Windows 2000, except it didn't work very well. This one does work well. I played with it this weekend. You can set up folders that synchronize with each other, and they used to say static content. This content changes pretty darn fast. Try it out, and I think in the lab I added one to ask you to set up a DFS system where you create a share folder on your core machine and a share folder on your full machine, and then create a share point through this so that it brings the two together. It's something that really I think you want to know how to use if you're going to manage these things, because we could set this up for all the home directories so that they get replicated to something off-site without going out and buying Carbonite or whoever else. You can set up your own replication topology. If you had multiple sites and you needed a central location to share all these things, you can use a hub and spoke arrangement. Or when you do these things, you can use a full mesh arrangement. I don't know that I would honestly do a full mesh more than about 2 or 3 servers personally. Hub and spoke, everything gets sent to the hub, and then that information gets sent back out the spokes. DFS namespace is going to be the share, and these namespaces are stored in Active Directory, so they're there. Once we set up replication and we get the content on all of the servers, if one of them goes down, and this would be the real advantage, particularly for the network share or the Active Directory namespace, one of them goes down, you just keep going because it doesn't care that it's down. If we set them up in different sites, it's going to use the site information to find the local server. So it is a very resilient tool to allow you to have redundancy of data in your network. DFS namespace allows you to create an entry point, can be a domain-based or a standalone, and you pick it as you go in. If you have a domain, I don't know why you wouldn't use a domain-based. A standalone only allows you to consolidate folders on a single server. A domain-based allows you to consolidate folders, shares on any server in the forest. I fooled around with this a little bit. So why can't I do this? Because I did a trust. The literature says that the machines have to be in the same forest. Don't have to be in the same domain, but they have to be in the same forest. And since by the time you get here, your core server will be a read-only or a RODC, right? Because you already did that one. Yeah. A read-only domain controller, and that's really not that big a deal to do that, is it?
So it's the answer file. You have to make sure you type in everything.
You have to make sure you type the answer file in exactly correctly and case sensitive. Many of the commands are case sensitive, and you have to add the password as the last line, which he didn't do. But once you get there, you can go create a folder and control it through the GUI of your full machine and add that folder to the namespace so that when you share the namespace, you get those 2 folders coming from a single location. And you can use the net use command in order to map a drive letter to it. DFS replication, synchronizing the data within the DFS structure. When you set this up, it may not synchronize everything exactly right now. It takes a few minutes, depending on how much data it's got to synchronize, but you can set up synchronization for this. Load balancing, this would be one of the big advantages, I think, to this thing, load balancing. And again, in the past, they've said static content. Don't know that the content's really got to be all that static anymore, because the ones that I have done have been nearly instantaneous changes. If you have bandwidth limitations, you can manage the replication times, how much bandwidth that you want to allow and what times you want to allow the replications to take place. So it does have lots of capability, lots of management capability. Load balancing back to a round robin or something like that. Or the files that are in Roanoke and Raleigh would be a load balancing so that the Raleigh people would use their local resources and the Roanoke would use their local resources. Where are we going to go? Or we could have 2 websites that have the same information. We make a change on the one, it gets replicated to the other one, and use a round robin DNS arrangement in order to send it there. By replicating across servers, we do have fault tolerance. We could, for instance, put one server here, and we'll put another server in Jody's house with his high-speed connection in Martinsville. Or actually, I always told Chris we were going to put it at his house. So that won't work. I've got dial-up, but that wouldn't work. But we can replicate from one to the other. I've got one set up that I'll show you here in just a minute on those. That's why I've got those servers open. Backup centralization facilitates centralized backups because you can back up all of your data from one location. Once deployed, it has a hierarchical namespace structure. It allows the users to locate information using the UNC path. It appears to be hierarchical. Is it really? Well, kind of. What we do is consolidate all those shares in one location. We have a location, we map a drive letter, and we get a whole bunch of different folders under that. They are shared folders, but they appear to be hierarchical. Configuring, add the folders, and they've got this in the book, the step-by-step when you actually do this thing, what you're going to do with it. And then configuring, they have those two. Install the file services role along with the DFS service of your choosing. When you do that, go ahead and put everything again, put FSRM on it when you install the service. The namespace, create a DFS namespace, acts as a central point for the clients to access the shared information. And then the namespace folders, and again, I want to show you one. And once added the namespace, the new server creates a file system hierarchy so that we can do that located at /DFS root. You don't necessarily have to put everything else in there. Actually, I think it's DFS roots when it actually creates it on this thing. Referral order, this is one that by default is going to go to the site. You can configure which order that the referrals go to, which server it's actually going to go to first, based on bandwidth, a number of different things in there. FSRM, to perform various tasks, managing files, allows us to filter files. This is one, if you don't want MP3 files on, you just say no. If you don't want AVI files on, you just say no, so that somebody tries to save them, they don't actually get saved. This is one of those, as I recall, it goes through all of the, oh, sure, fooled you. Windows loves to do that. Get right up to the last step and it says, oh, I made a mistake. You can't do that. But you can restrict what goes there. Screening files can use built-in custom templates. The advantage to templates, and you can use templates here as also in disk quotas. Actually, we're managing file disk quotas. The advantage to a template, even if you create the template, if all of a sudden you decide to change something, let's say you had a terabyte worth of information, so you restricted everybody to 250 meg or something like that, and now you get 50 terabytes and you want to give them more space. All you got to do is change the template, and it'll change all of the restrictions that it was used to create. It also has a reports portion, and that's one I was talking about, that who's using all of the space, who's got the big files, who's not using files. You may want to go looking for files that people aren't using, things that you can delete. Pretty good report section. And a lot of these things, again, were functionality that migrated from the Windows storage server, which is a pretty neat device in itself. Filter screening, let's say screening files based on built-in and custom templates, and we have the filter screening. The filter screening is by file type, allows you to restrict what users can actually put on your machine. This would protect you from, we'll go back to pirating. What if you want to keep pirated movies off of your network? Other than doing filters at the firewall and things like that, what if you just didn't let those file types on your network? Can protect you, the administrator, best effort sort of thing. You've made the effort to keep them off, but they did it in spite of you. Then the guilt goes from you to them. But you have to make an effort to keep your network clean. Otherwise, it's going to be on you and not them. It'll actually be on both of you. So DFS, to me, again, DFS is the kind of cool thing. I wanted to go through permissions. Hopefully they make a little more sense. I think that you really got to do permissions a couple times before it starts making any sense at all. But the shares only across the network, NTFS at the console. When we put them together, share and NTFS, we get the most restrictive. Individually, we get the most permissive or additive permissions. DFS, for creating a central point of entry for accessing the network, allows us to bring together distributed information, which can be handy because people get really confused. This set of files is here, this set of files is on a different server, something else is on a third server. What the DFS allows you to do is make them all appear to be at a central location so that you can get whatever you want from them. File and folder sharing, we looked at share permissions, user permissions. NTFS access control list, the list is just the users that are there, the access control entries. The list is the list of users, the access control entries are the actual permissions that those individuals get. Sharing, the net share command can be handy. DFS technologies, the distributed file system, something that we can use to make it simpler for the users as well as to have redundancy for us. Load sharing, all sorts of advantages to using DFS. The servers do not have to be domain controllers. The servers can be servers, but they need to be in the same forest. They don't have to be in the same domain, but they do have to be in the same forest. And DFS replication, synchronizing, so instead of going out and buying the carbonites or whatever, we put servers in different physical locations and replicate whenever we want based upon our bandwidth requirements, because you can control when replication takes place. If you just want to do a daily replication, then don't do replications during working hours, daily as in a backup sort of arrangement. If you want everything to be current, you're going to have to replicate all the time. Questions? Let's take a break and then we'll look at a little bit about DFS